Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to today's stream. I think we're set up. Yeah, it looks like we're good. Just waiting. Streaming, still getting used to streaming on YouTube, so it takes a few seconds for the video to come through. So to just watch it, I have to watch it for a few seconds to make sure that I'm actually streaming. So, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to today's stream. Today, what we're going to be doing is building a personal website, and we're going to be doing it a little bit different today. Normally, I would build websites or apps with React and JavaScript because that's kind of the modern way of building things. But today, what we're going to be doing is setting up a website, a personal website using just basic HTML and CSS. And this is going to be for very like beginning how to code, sort of like what is HTML, what is CSS, how to use it to get a very like basic personal website. So we're going to be creating sort of an online resume, and I hope that you feel free to code along with me and um, hope that you learn something. If you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat, or if you're watching this after the stream goes live, feel free to ask in the comments and I will get back to you with any questions you have. So I'm just going to pull up some notes that I had here. Um, and we'll start right now. So here is my screen, and what we're going to be building today is this personal, uh, what we're going to say is an interactive resume for a character that I created called Callie Roland. So you're going to see what we're going to have is a mobile version. We're going to build a desktop version as well. And on it, just going to have like a photo. We're going to have some profile information some information about California roles, some experience, which is some books that have referenced California roles. All this information I just grabbed off Wikipedia and just whipped together this sort of quick mock-up of a site that we're going to build. So there's the mobile version, and then when we switch over, we're going to also build a desktop version that is going to have the profile information, experience, and a contact information. And what we're going to learn from this is the goal is to learn a little bit about HTML, a little bit about CSS, and some CSS best practices. So first thing we're going to do is actually create a new project. And normally what people would do is you for a React project, you'd use something like Create React App or some sort of boilerplate, but we're going to build this all right from scratch. So I'm going to use a tool called VS Code, which is just a code editor. You could use anything. You could use VS Code. There's also tools like Atom, which does very similar things, Sublime Text, Notepad++ if you're on Windows, and JetBrains. A company called JetBrains has one called WebStorm, but I never recommend JetBrains because they charge a lot of money for the same product over and over and over and over. But VS Code is free, so if you want to download it, you can just look up VS Code and you can get it right here, Visual Studio Code. You can download it for a Mac, or if you're on Windows, it'll have a Windows download as well. And it's kind of the industry standard of um, code editors. So I have a blank sort of project here with actually nothing inside of it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create, not open folder. I'm just going to open my Finder and pull this off screen quickly. And I'm just going to create a new directory called personal site. And now that I have that set up, I can pull this over and you can see that there's just this personal site directory, and we're going to drag that right into VS Code to get started. And right now we just have literally an empty folder, nothing inside of it. And what we're going to do is sort of set up a very quick website. And this website's going to be very plain, nothing really to it, but just to get started on our document. So we're going to create a file called index.html. And what this is going to do is be the root page of our project. If you're using VS Code, what you can do is actually, if you hit exclamation mark and then tab, it's going to fill out all of the information for you to create a blank HTML page. We're not going to do that for now. What we're going to do is actually just sort of talk through each of these tags. So first thing we'll see here is this Doctype Html. And what this is going to do is tell our document what language we're using. So HTML, just as a little note, is short. It's a short for hypertext markup language, and it's not really what it was never really meant for what we use it for today. HTML actually was started as a way to send documents across the internet, similar to like what you would see in a Microsoft Word or just like a text file. It was actually meant for that type of information transfer. But obviously, as the internet's grown, we've taken it and sort of done crazy things with it by the introduction of CSS and JavaScript. So what we're going to do first is we're going to say HTML, and we're going to close our HTML tag. And this is just saying everything within this document is our HTML. Next, we're going to add a head tag, and I'll explain what this is in a second. And then we're going to add a body tag, and this is going to say the body of our content, and this is what will get rendered to the browser. So inside of that, we're just going to say h1 hello world. Whoops. Whoops. I can't spell. And we're going to save that. Now what we're going to do is drag this HTML to a browser tab, and you'll see that we have hello world in our browser. So what we're doing here is we have a very basic, we actually have a very basic website at this point. We have an index.html, and the reason we call it index is that when a browser looks for a website, it will actually always search for index.html. So even when people create these crazy applications using things like Create React App, these big projects, they're all going to render out an index.html, and that's what our browser is going to get. This is also what you'll see up here. It's going to be really small, so you probably can't read it, but our file is actually going to be index.html in our browser. So that's proof that our browser just kind of searches for that index.html whenever we go to a website. And if we wanted to create something like an about page, we could create a new file called about.html, copy all this over, and say about me. And now if we were to replace this and go to about, you'll see that we get about me. So this sort of shows like how a website is structured. All of these HTML files that serve up different content based on what's inside of them and what's inside of this body tag. So we're not going to need this about.html, so we'll just delete that. We'll go back in our browser to our index. And now this head section. What this is sort of meta information that the browser uses to get information about the website. One thing we can do in here, which is important, is we can add a title to our site. So we're going to say title is Cali Roll personal site. And what this title tag is going to do is when we refresh our page, you're going to see our tab up top here now changes to say Cali Roll personal site. So this is what our browser will use to sort of title our site within our tabs. There's a whole bunch of information we could get into this head tag, but we're not going to get into too much of it because we care about more the learning HTML CSS. So next we're just going to set up our folder structure. Um, what we're going to need for this is actually, if we head back to here, we're going to need our HTML, which is all of our text and markup here. We're going to need CSS for styling. So we're going to put our CSS in a styles directory, and we're going to need a few images. We're going to need this California roll and also these SVGs down here. So I've just sort of prepared this at, if you go to my website at eddysim.com/projects/cali-roll, I have a link here where you can download those images and everything that you'll need. So this will download all the assets that we need, which is basically the images. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it styles. And in that styles folder, we're going to create a new file called styles.css. And this is going to be our CSS file that we're going to work in to build our entire site. And we're also going to create a new folder called images. And this is where we are going to put those images that I have downloaded now. And I'm just going to drag those images in here. So you'll see we have our Cali roll image, our Facebook SVG, Instagram SVG, and Twitter.svg. So our directory structure is pretty much set up. We have our styles, we have our HTML file set up, we have our images ready to go. First thing we are going to get into is actually we're going to code out this section of the website, the sort of header, as we're going to call it. So we're going to make it on mobile first, because when we're building websites, it's best practice to always build your mobile first and then do what we call progressive enhancements. So as a screen gets bigger, usually means that somebody's on a better connection. So if somebody comes to your website on a mobile device, there's a chance that they could be running off of data. So we don't want to give them too much information. Once we get to a desktop, they're most likely on Wi-Fi, where it's not as important. We still don't want to send a huge amount of information from our website, but it's not as important if they're downloading a larger image or more images or bigger scripts or anything like that. So we're going to build this part. And to do that, how are we going to get started? So let's go back to our index.html, and we're going to delete this hello world, and we're going to put in a header. So a header is what we call a landmark tag. And this just lets a screen reader, or if somebody's tabbing through the website, it just lets the accessibility tools know exactly where they are. And within our header, we're going to give it a class of header. And I'll explain what that is in a second. And we're going to say image source equals ./images/cali-roll.jpg. And we'll close that, and that will just be a link to this page, to this image. And we are also going to do another div, and I'll explain all this in a second. Class equals header, and we're going to say __ content. And I'll explain what that means in just a second. Here we're going to say, give our name and our interactive resume. So we're going to say H1 Cali Rollin and an H2 of interactive resume. And we're actually going to say class equals heading 2. And I'll just get rid of this sidebar quickly so we can see the whole thing. And now when we save this and refresh, you'll see we get this big image. Oh, it's huge. And our text below it saying Cali Rollin interactive resume. So what's happening here is our document is reading through our markup we're saying header, then display the image, then have some text, a heading 1, a heading 2. The heading 1 says Callie Rowland, the heading 2, interactive resume. So as you can see, that's kind of exactly what we get. I believe if we switch over, we actually want our text above. So we're just going to take this, do a cut, and paste it above the image. And now if we refresh, we'll see that our text is above, which is more what we want. So what does all of this mean? So class header is what we are going to use in our CSS to reference this, to style this section of the site. Now, the reason we use this underscore underscore here is a technique in CSS called BEM. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this, like anyone who's started coding has learned this, seen this like GIF of Peter Griffin where he's trying to, it says like CSS is complicated and he's trying to pull all the curtains and everything. This sort of helps us to not, but the reason for that GIF is that CSS gets complicated because we say things like class header. We might have somewhere down here like div where we also say class header, and we don't want these things to be styled the same. So what BEM does is it's a CSS class naming convention that stands for block element modifier. So we're saying header is our block. So this is kind of our header component. And then we're saying underscore underscore means that we're going to an element. So header content. Content is an element within the header. And then we have text within there. Now you'll notice on this H2, we have not done header underscore underscore heading 2. We've just done heading 2. And the reason for that is we want heading 2 to be its own sort of block, which we will get into adding modifiers to this as well. So let's jump over and style this. So we're going to do that. We're going to go to our CSS. And before we actually style, we need to bring our CSS into this, because right now you'll see there's no reference to our CSS anywhere. So what we're going to do is in our head, we're going to say link, and I believe it's href equals /styles, styles.css, and rel equals style sheet. And this is saying to include our style sheet as a CSS file. And we can test that this is working by going into styles and saying body background red, and refresh our page, and you'll see that the background of our document is now red. So we know that that's working. First thing we're going to do is actually reset some things on here. So what I mean by that is when we go to our CSS or to our document, you'll see that like this image goes way too far. We have like a little bit of space here. You might be tough to see, but some space next to the image. There's some padding all around our document. If we scroll down, we have this space behind or below the image. We're just going to get rid of all that. So to do that, we're going to say HTML, and this means we're styling the HTML tag, and we're going to say box sizing border box. And what this is going to do is tell our HTML document that all of its padding and borders are inside of the document, are inside. So we're not, any padding should not expand an element outwards. It should always pad an element inwards. And then we're going to say HTML star, and this, we're going to say box sizing inherit. And that's saying every element, this star is every element within HTML is going to do the same thing. Next on our body, we're going to say margin 0, padding 0, font size 16 pixels, and a line height of 1.5. So what this is going to do is remove any margins or padding from our body. We're going to set a font size to 16 pixels and a line height of 1.5. Line height 1.5 will mean 1.5 times 16 at this point. So I'm not really sure what that is. I think like 22 maybe. So when we save that and refresh, you'll see that now our image goes directly to this left side. but we still get a little bit of over, it's still a little bit wide. So what we're going to do is say image, and you'll notice that this image is the same as our image tag here. And this is going to style any image tag. And we're going to say max width 100%. And that's going to make it so that our image no longer goes outside of the max width of our browser. So if we expand our browser, you'll see that as it gets smaller, the image gets smaller. And once it's at 100% of the image size, it'll stay there. And we're also going to do a vertical align bottom. And all this is going to do is say that any image should be aligned to the very bottom space that it takes up. So when we save that, what we'll see is we have this little bit of space below our image. Now when we refresh, oh, we still do. I think that's just because it's not long enough. Our document's not long enough. But what we should have gotten is the image aligned straight to the bottom there. So now we have our text. I think we need to load some fonts. So we need to load this font, which is called Redressed, and Source Sans Pro. So to do that, we're just going to go over to our fonts.google.com, fonts.google.com. We're going to look up Redressed. Whoops, need to do that. We're going to select that one and say select this style and scroll down here. It doesn't give us Source Sans Pro, so we're just going to browse fonts, Source Sans Pro, and we'll add 400 for regular font weight, and I think we also want bold at 700. And now we'll see that we get this link that we can copy. And in our index.html, we can just add that link right below our styles. Or actually, let's add it before our styles. And that's just going to import all of our Google fonts for us. So what we'll see here is on our Google Fonts website, if I zoom in a little bit, we get these font families, and we'll just want to copy that and paste that on our body and cut out the redressed one. And now when we refresh our site, you'll see that all of our fonts go to Source Sans Pro. So next thing we want to do is, I think we want to add this background and center the text and all that and that stuff. So what we're going to do is actually go to our first class styling. So you'll see here we have this .header class name. This is what we're going to use to style our header section of our website. So in our CSS, we can actually say dot, which references a class, and header. And this is going to style that header sort of box that wraps around our whole header element here. And if we were to say background yellow and save, when we refresh, we'll see we get this sort of yellow background. I have this weird space above, but we'll take care of that. Now we don't want exactly yellow, so we're going to head over to our file here, and we're going to get our background color, which is this hex. So F8, F981. And now when we save that and refresh, you'll see that our background color blends right into our image, which is what we want. And next, what do we want to do? We want to center this text and add some colors to them. So this is our H1. As you can see, if actually, I don't know if you can see, and I don't know how to make this bigger, but we have a font size of 72 pixels on this. So what we're going to say is actually above our image, we're going to say all of our H1s. We want a font family of redressed, which we get from here, from this Google Fonts. So if I copy that and paste it just to make sure, and when we refresh, you'll see that we get that nice redressed font. And we're actually going to say margin 0 for this case. This is not something you might always want to do because what we're basically saying is remove all margins from the headings, and headings are given margins by the browser by default to space them out as they're used in content. But when we get rid of that margin, what you're going to see is this white line at the top, when we refresh, goes away. And that's pretty good there. Now we'll give it a font size. And we could say 72 pixels, but what we actually want to do is use a unit called rem, which is relative. I'm not sure what the M stands for. I think it's like a weird word, but basically this means relative to the base font size of the document. So our base size of our document is what we declared up here, 16 pixels. So if we want 72 pixels, what we can actually say is 72 divided by 16 is equal to 4.5. So if we say 4.5 rem, we're actually going to get the equivalent of 72 pixels. Now we want this centered. So I think we want everything in our header centered. So in our header class, we're going to say text align center. And that's just going to center all of our content when we refresh. And this heading 2 has a bunch of margin as well. So we're actually going to say on all of our H2s, we're going to say margin 0. So that gets it a little closer there. And I don't think this is the right color. Yeah, so we want a color of 555 for the header and this little dark yellow for the H2. So on our H1, actually the 555, we're going to set to the body color. So we're going to say color, and color just references to all the color of all text. And we're going to say 555, and you'll see that when we refresh, this gets a little bit lighter. Now, an interesting thing to note here is we're about to see our first sort of cascade of CSS. So CSS stands for cascading style sheets. And what that means is everything will sort of take the attributes it can from its parent. So what we see here is when we added that color on our H2 went to the 555 sort of light gray as well. Now, if we add a new color to our H2 of our dark yellow here, D5BC19, what you're going to see is just this H2 is going to change to that darker color, which is exactly what we want. And I think we also wanted it font size 24. So if we say 24 divided by 16 is 1.5, we're going to say font size 1.5 rem and text transform uppercase. And what text transform uppercase is going to do is just turn all of our text to uppercase. And that's looking pretty good here. So I think the next thing we need to do is just add some padding around it. So what we're going to do for that is on our header content class, which we have here, we're going to say dot header content dot, which will be our class header content. We're going to say padding of how much do we want here? I think here we want 32 pixels. So 32 divided by 16 to get that rem unit. 2, so 2 rem. And we have that nice padding there. So here's a little trick for Chrome. If we want to view what this will actually look like in a mobile device, which we are developing for right now, we can right click and say inspect. And right up here, I wonder if this will get bigger if I zoom in. Yeah, so right up here we get this toggle device toolbar, and we can say iPhone 678, and we'll actually get a frame there that will look like an iPhone. And one thing we need to do actually, and I'm not sure how to do this off the top of my head, is to add a responsive meta tag. So if we search meta tag responsive meta tag and jump into this first link, is probably going to give it to us. So meta name viewport, and we're just going to add that. We're going to copy that and add it into our index right under our title. And this is just some metadata to say that the width should be the device width. And that's actually going to give us a little bit nicer. There we go. So now we see on a device, this is actually what we want. So I think we're pretty much done with our header now for mobile. What we're going to do is we're going to move on and bring this into, we're going to do our responsive, move to our responsive and make it on desktop. So if I go back to my CSS, and I'm just going to swap this around a little bit so that we can see. It's not what I wanted to do. Just bring this down here so we can still see our device. And we're going to change from an iPhone 6 to, actually, we'll just close out of this and say that this is our desktop size, because this actually is our desktop size. So what we'll want to do is, when we're small, when our browser's small, we want these to be stacked on top of each other. And when we get bigger, we want them to actually go side by side. So to do that, we're going to jump into our styles, and we're going to say header. We're going to do an @media query, say screen. So whenever we're on screen and our min width is, let's say, 768 pixels, and within here, we can actually redefine our header class, and it's going to take that cascading from the header, and we can say display flex. So something might be wrong here. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like something's wrong there. Min width. Oh, we need to say and. When we're screen media, when we're on a screen and our min width is 768, we're going to go side by side. So now we have something interesting in that we want our image sort of on the left side and our text on the right, but here we want our text above and our image below. So the way we're going to do that is we're actually going to say flex direction. And what this is going to do is tell our header which direction to display content. And we're going to say row reverse. And this is just going to reverse the direction of the content. So when we save that, we see that this switches over here. And now we have this really big image, which I don't think we actually want. So what we're also going to say within this, we're going to copy this media screen, and we're going to do a header content, and we're just going to say flex 1, 0, 50%. And this is saying make it a flex item that takes up one space with a basis of 50%. So start at 50% width and say max width 50%. And this should actually give our text way more space. But now our image is kind of shot way over here. So we're going to give our image a class of header underscore underscore image, and copy this, paste a new one, and say header underscore underscore image, and give it the same thing. And that there, now we have sort of our image takes up 50%, our text takes up 50%, which is what we want. Next thing we want to do is make sure that this text is center aligned here. So we're going to say header align item center and justify content center. And this is just going to say the align items is going to say vertically align my item center, and then justify content is going to say horizontally align my item center. So when we do that, we'll see that we get kind of exactly what we want there. Now, this is looking pretty good, but what will happen is when we grow our screen really big, is we don't want this to take up too much space. Like at this point, we have a huge image. So we're going to introduce the idea of a container here. So what we're going to do is head back to our index.html, and right below our header, we're going to say div class equals container. And below our image, we're going to close our div tag. So what we're saying is everything, we've just added sort of a new parent element, we call it, and given it the class name of container. And in our HTML, we're going to scroll just above header and say dot container. And we're going to say max width, we'll say 1024 pixels. And we're going to give it a margin of 0 auto. And that's just going to align it to the center. And when we save that, now what happens is as we grow bigger, oh, I guess we should save our index as well. So as our file grows, or as we grow bigger, interesting. What happened is we no longer have our flex here. So let's actually do a modifier on this. So our first BEM modifier, we're going to say class name is container dash dash flex. So what we have here is sticking with our BEM idea of block element modifier. We're going to say container is our block, and we have a modifier, which is dash dash, which is different from our element underscore underscore of flex. So what we're going to do here is dot container dash dash flex, and we're going to say display flex, and we're actually just going to copy, we're going to copy this whole thing here because this is what we actually want. Paste that there and say container flex. And now, as we make our site bigger, you'll see that this sort of stays within the 1024 pixels that we gave it up here. And to prove that, we give this a background of tomato. You're going to see that now you won't see it behind this image because our image actually has a yellow background, but you'll see that this never grows beyond that 1024 pixels. So that's good for that. So I think that our header section of our site here is done. We've made it responsive. So next we're going to move on to our profile quickly. So next we're going to go back to our HTML. We're going to create under our header a main tag. And this is going to say the main content of our site. And we are going to say a section, which is going to say a new section within the main content. And we're going to give it a class name, a class of profile. And this is going to be very similar to this, where profile is our block, and then everything underneath it will be our elements. So we're going to have this profile, which will be an h2. So h2 class equals heading 2, same as above, profile. And then we're going to say a div with a class of profile underscore underscore content div. And within that content, which is going to wrap these two sort of paragraphs, we're going to say div class equals profile. And because the idea with BEM is that we actually don't want to have like element, so we wouldn't do something like content profile or content about. This section here is still going to be just an element under profile. So we're going to say profile details. So just mocking out our markup here, div class equals profile about. And then we'll say, copy all this information, personal details, H3 about personal details. And what we're going to do here is actually use a list. So this is kind of listed data. So we have the age, birth date, hometown, and you can learn more by a link to the Wikipedia article that I actually copied all this from. So we're going to do that in a list. So we're going to say unordered list, which is a UL, and we're going to say a list item, and we'll just give it this information, and we'll copy that down 3 times and say birth date is November 25th, hometown. Kind of speed through this because this isn't the important part of this. Town, and learn more is going to be a link. So to create a link in HTML, what we're going to use is called an anchor tag. And we're going to say A for anchor. And anything within here is going to be a link. Now to give it an actual link, we're going to say href equals, and we'll look up the Wikipedia article, Wikipedia for California roll, and just copy that URL and put that in our href and delete this. Now when we save this information, oh, and we have to close our list tag here. So now we've given it a list, an unordered list with 4 list items. So when we save that, what we get is our profile, some personal details with a list. We also want to have our About California Roles section. So we're going to say in our profile about an H3 saying about California roles, and a P for a paragraph tag because we have a paragraph of text. So a paragraph is just a very basic tag to say a paragraph of text. And now when we refresh, you'll see that we have sort of all the content we want here. So we've kind of mocked out our markup. So let's quickly style this. What we are actually going to do here as well is this class profile. We're also going to give it a class of container. Now, because we're using class here, we can give it multiple class names. If we were to use something like ID, you can only give it one ID. You can only give an element one ID, and it will, and you can only use one ID per document. So if we were to say this was an ID of container, we couldn't come down here and say this also has an ID. IDs are meant to be unique within the page, whereas class names can be used over and over. So because we already have this container class set up, when we save this, what we're going to see is our content shifts in a little, which means it's going to stay within that sort of range that we wanted it. So next thing we are going to do is jump into our CSS, scroll to the very bottom, and add a new profile class. And we are going to give it some padding here and then align the text center, I think. So we're going to say padding, and padding is a style that just allows us to pad information in from the top, bottom, and the 2 sides. So we can do things like padding top equals 100 pixels, and you'll see that our content moves down 100 pixels. We can do padding right, and you'll see that our content jumps in 100 pixels. Left, you'll see the same thing, and bottom would do the same. We can also do what's called a shorthand, where we just say padding. And I believe if we hover on this in VS Code, so shorthand property to set the values of the thickness of the padding area. If left is omitted, it is the same as right. If the bottom is omitted, it is the same as top. If the right is omitted, it is the same as top. And the values may not be negative. So what we can do is we can say padding 100 pixels, 10 pixels, and 20 pixels, 30 pixels. And this is going to go top, right, bottom, left. We can also do something like this, where we say 110, where this is going to be top and bottom, and this is going to be right and left. So for this case, we actually don't want any padding on the left and right, and we want 4.5 rem on the top and bottom. So what we're going to see is when we save this, we get some nice spacing here. And if we were to actually add a background color to this, we'd see that we get that nice spacing at the bottom as well. So we can remove that, and let's do a text align center to center align our text. And we are off to a start. So one thing we'll notice here is we actually have this gray text instead of the yellow. So we're actually going to jump in and to our HTML and change this heading to, we're going to add a modifier to it. So we're going to say heading to with a modifier, which is dash dash. And we're going to say gray because we want our modifier to be descriptive. Now up here, our H2, we're just going to change it to a header 2, I believe. Do we call it header 2 or heading? Oh, I've called it both. Heading 2, and I think I called this one heading 2, yes. So we're going to change this to heading 2, and you'll see nothing's going to change. But now because we have a modifier on it, what we can do is we can say heading 2 gray, and we can set the color to the default 555 gray we were using, and that will change anything with that class name to gray. So we have that done. Next, let's style our H3 here. So we'll just do that right below our H1. We'll say our font size is 18 pixels. So if we go 18 divided by 16 and use that as rem, we want a text transform, same as before, to uppercase. And that makes it uppercase, which we want. And now we're going to do our list. So by default, all lists come with bullets, which makes sense. We have a listed information. We want them bulleted out. Just going to zoom this in. Actually, I just realized it's pretty small. But for this one, we actually don't want it as a list. So we're going to give it a class name of class equals profile. We'll say info. And then down here in our CSS, we're going to do dot profile underscore info. And now we're targeting our list. So we're going to say list style none. And we're going to say margin 0 and padding 0. And that's just going to take off all the margins and paddings like we wanted. And now when we refresh that, that's kind of what we want there. And final thing for this list, I think, two more things. We'll add the bolded text and the link color. So to add the bolded text, we're actually going to go into our HTML and we're going to add a strong tag around the text that we want bold. And strong is strong. If we hover is, oh, we're not going to get any help. This is just going to say that the text is bold, and when a screen reader reads it, it's also going to give it a little bit of emphasis. So we'll just copy that down here and close all of our strong tags. We actually want this one out here after the semicolons. And we get that nice bold text. And for our link tag, we're going to head back to our CSS, scroll to the top where we're styling all of our elements, and we're going to say a link is a color of, we'll grab this color here, this dark yellow that we had, and a text decoration of underline. So now our link is the right color. Now what we want is when we hover on this link, we want our personal details we called profile underscore underscore details. So we'll just add that here. And we try to add things in our CSS in the same order that they come in our document. So we have our profile here, and then our profile details comes before the info. So I've added it in our CSS as well. And we're going to say a margin bottom of 4.5 rem. And what this is going to do is give a big space between this and that about California roles. And yeah, that's what we want. Is that what we want? No, that's not actually what we want. What we want is a padding bottom. And we want it actually at 2.25 rem. So the reason we want padding is we also want to add a border bottom of 1 pixel solid and our yellow color, which I'm just going to grab from up here, of our dark yellow. Now we're going to get that nice border here. And then we can say on our profile about to have a padding top of 2.25 rem. And we're going to get that nice and evenly spaced out there, almost evenly spaced out. I think that we have some margin on this H2 that we could get rid of. So if we go to our header 2, no, we don't have any margin there. What could it be? Let's do a quick inspect. And yeah, it looks like, oh, that's a heading 3, that's why. So let's actually take this and heading 3 and we'll say margin top 0. And now we have that nice even space between our line and our content there. So that's pretty good here, I think. Oh, the one thing is we don't want this text going all the way to the side, right? So what we're going to say is on our profile class, which is this section, and we already have that in here. We gave it a padding of 0 here. We're just going to change that to 1.5 rem. And you'll see that that just prevents that text from going all the way to the sides. So now if we were to view it as an actual device, you'll see that that text kind of stays centered in there. Our line is dividing our content nicely, and we're pretty good. So next, we are going to move on. We're almost out of time here, so I did want to cover these. Let's see if we can get this done in the next 10 minutes here. So the next thing we're going to do is move on to this experience section. We're going to skip out on this little triangle up here, and we're just going to move on to these cards. So what we're going to do is in our index.html, below our section for profile. So one thing to note here actually is you'll see as we scroll down our code, this starts to get a little confusing of like, we don't really know where we are. One good practice is at the end of your classes, so this section is profile, and we scroll down, we know that this is the end of it. We actually add a comment of the end of our class names. So this just lets the next person or ourself know that this is where our tag actually ends. So below this, we're going to add a new section with a class of experience. And we're going to add that comment down here just to let ourselves know where this ends once we get into it a little bit. And we're going to add another heading 2 which is just going to say experience. And what else are we going to do here? We're going to actually, let's just do that for now. And then we'll talk about this card. So now when we refresh our page, whoa, how did that happen? I think I clicked that link. And we scroll down, we get this experience down here. So let's head over to our CSS and say experience. And we're going to give it a background color, which we want the whole experience section to have, of EEE, my favorite dolphin noise, EEE, um, background, and we're going to say a padding of just like above 4.5 rem and then 1.5 rem. And actually, I think that's all we need for here. And a text align center to center our text. So we have that experience centered in. So next we're going to create our card. So this is an interesting section. In what we would have here is normally in sort of the modern way of building things, we would call this a component. And you'll see that it's reused. And we would just send it information like the title, the author, and the content and the link. But because we're not building this in a sort of modern JavaScript framework, we're going to build this using, this is where we'll see the power of BEM and sort of CSS come through. So we're going to take our first one and we're just going to build it out, just our first card. So we're going to say div with a class of card. And we're going to say in here, div with a class of card. The element is title. And that, and these cards, this data, I'm just going to copy this and talk. This data is stuff that I just got from Wikipedia. I think these are some books that talk about California rolls. Author is Trevor Corson. We're going to have a description. And you'll see that these are all sort of the classes follow that BEM element, the block element stuff that we talked about earlier. And then we're going to have this get the book, and this is going to be a button. So what we're going to say here is an link, which we don't exactly know where it goes. So we're just going to say pound for now. And we're going to give it a class of button. Now this is not going to be part of the card, but the card is going to use it. And the reason it's not going to be is if we were to scroll up here on the desktop version, which I don't think we'll have time for today, we actually wanted to use that button here as well. So we want it available everywhere and not just within this card class name. So we'll say get the book. So now when we refresh, you'll see that we have our content here, and we'll just do some quick styling here. So we're going to say card has a background of white. So we can say FFF, which is white hex code, or we can actually say white. Our CSS knows that that would be called a web safe color. There's a few of these, like all of our common colors like blue, red, green. And then there's some fun ones like tomato, which is the best color, olive, olive drab. You can kind of see all these different colors. We're going to say white. We're going to give it a padding of 1.5 rem, a border of 1 pixel solid, and we're just going to say DDD, and a border radius of 5 pixels, which is going to give us a little bit of a rounded corner look. So you'll see here our corners are a little bit rounded if we zoom in there. And we're going to give it a box shadow of 0, 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 0, and then RGBA, which is red, green, blue, alpha. So we're saying 0, 0, 0, which is the RGB for black, and then 0.15, which is an opacity of 15%. So you'll see we get that kind of box shadow look there, or that sort of raised look there. And then let's style our title. So card title, I think we want a font weight of bold. We want text decoration. Let's look quickly over here, uppercase. And I think that's actually pretty much it. No, not text decoration, text transform of uppercase, which is going to make it all capitals. Our author, we're going to say a text style. Is it text style or font style of italic? And that's just going to give it an italic look there. And then we're going to say our description, card description. And I'm just kind of powering through this because we're almost at time here. I think we actually are a few minutes over, but we'll just continue through. For this, we're actually going to say, we're going to give it a margin of 1.5 rem. And what that's going to do is give it some space on the top and bottom. And we actually want it to have a border. So as you'll see here, we have this sort of, whoops, top border there. So what we're going to say is border top is going to be a color of our dark yellow. So when we do this, oh, sorry, 1 pixel and solid. When we do this, you'll see that we get this border right next to the text, which isn't really what we want. So outside of our margin, we're also going to say padding top of 1.5 rem. And what this is going to do is give us that nice equal space between the title, we say the margin, which is this top spacing, the border, and then the padding is inside the border. So that's pretty good there. And then we're just going to do a quick style of our button. We're going to say has a background of, I think this is our yellow, a color of 555. We don't want this to have a underline. So here we'll see that cascade come in where we're saying for all the links have the underline, except for our button don't actually have that underline. We'll give it some padding of 1 rem and on top and bottom and 1.5 on the sides, and a border radius of 5 pixels. So now that gives that button kind of that nice look there. We're also going to say display inline block. And the reason for this is by default, links are inline. And what that means is we can put links inline with text and they're not going to break the flow of the page. A block element, what a block element would do is if this link was a block element, it would actually break to the next line when we used it and take up the whole block space. So when we say inline block, we're still going to allow this button to be used inline. So we could put it next to text, but we're saying make it a block element as well so that it can have padding and margins, and it can also know that it's supposed to disrupt the flow of the document. So what that's going to do is you'll see that we don't have much space here. And the reason for that is our padding on our card, that is this 1.5 rem at the top, is actually from the bottom of our text here and not from the bottom of our button. Because it thinks that this is inline, it's giving that padding right here in between the text and the bottom. So when we say inline block, we're allowing it to disrupt that sort of flow of the document. And when we refresh, we'll see that we actually get that nice equal padding now below the button. So we'll just say text transform uppercase and font weight bold. We're actually going to say font size 14 divided by 16. Whoops. So we're going to make it a little bit of a smaller font. And we're also going to say hover, give it a hover state of a background that is our dark yellow. So what's going to happen here is when we hover, we're going to see this change to our dark yellow. Now, we don't really want that jumpy look. That's kind of harsh to the eye. So what we can say is transition, and this will say background, which is going to say transition the background. We give it a time of 300 milliseconds. And what that's going to do is now it's going to transition nicely between those two background colors. So when we hover, we get that sort of nice transition look. So now we have our card, and I'm just going to zoom this out. Actually, zooming out doesn't really help what I want here. So we have our card, and now this is the power of BEM, is we can actually just take this, and because we have all these class names applied, we can just copy and paste and refresh, and you'll see that we get this card. And one thing I actually want to do is add a margin bottom of 1.5 rem, just to give it some space below. And you'll see that we get that card. Now we don't have to worry about styling that. We can just change out some content here. So we'll say the story of sushi, the story of sushi by the same author, and the description. And now when we refresh, all of our styles are the same. And this allowed us to move really quickly to add that second card. Or if we were to add a third one, we can add a third card, and you'll see that we're able to get this going really quickly now. So I think that we're kind of at time. We've made it pretty far here. So if we zoom out, let's just take a look at what we've done within our sort of hour here. We have our personal site with some text, a photo of us. In our case, we are a California role. We have some profile information, some information about us, and then our experience. One last thing I want to do is, because these are kind of too big, much too big, let's just add one more thing where we just sort of align them how we want. So let's head back to our HTML, which is hidden behind our browser here. And we're just going to, after this H2, I believe we should actually just be able to go div class equals container. And then because we already created this modifier called flex, I think we should just be able to add that div, and we'll add a comment so that we know where it ends. Oh, that might not like that, but. And now when we get this, so now you'll see we get that sort of like side by side, which we want. So one more thing we can do here to give this just a little bit nicer is on this container, let's give it one more class of experience underscore cards. And we're just saying that this is an element of cards. And within that, we actually want to do a gap of 1.5 rem. And then what we're going to say is our card flex 1. And I think that this is going to make this gap didn't do exactly what I want. Let me see. I'm just going to do a quick inspect. Oh, that's because I forgot to save my index. There we go. Now we get that gap. So this is looking much better now that we have these 3 cards here. We can do one super final thing and give this a margin top of 2.5 rem, and that gives it some space. And now what we'll see is we've made it pretty far in our hour and 10 minutes, I think we're about here, is we have a website set up from scratch with a little bit of a hero image here with a photo of us, some profile information. A note on this hero is that it is responsive as well. So if we were to take our browser and shrink it down, hard to get that, we get the responsive look that we want. We have our profile information here. We have our experience here. And these cards are all using classes so that we can match, or we can just quickly reuse them. So that worked out pretty well. We didn't quite finish, but not too bad. Let me know in the comments if you guys want to finish this one. And if you do, I can come back to it next week. One thing I wanted to go over quickly is for this was a very like beginner sort of learn how to code your own website, but this is also something that you're going to see a lot of sort of junior and intermediate developers. What they're going to do is when they want to build a simple website like this, they're going to spin up like this super complicated React app or maybe a Gatsby site or like a Next.js site or something to just do all of this basic stuff. And it's not really needed. This is truly like sort of the fundamentals of what a website is. And as you can see, we've done quite a bit with just the basics. Um, so I encourage anyone sort of learning to develop to learn these basics and learn how to build these sites with just HTML and CSS. And maybe if you need a little bit of JavaScript, you could use just a little bit of JavaScript, but it's not really needed to spin up these crazy like React applications just to get a personal website out. So that is kind of what I wanted to cover today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments, let me know in the let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I just got distracted by the chat. Thank you, Librielle. That's actually my wife. She's my biggest fan. Lets me sit down here and do these on Sundays. So yeah, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. We can come back to this if you would like, or tune in next week for another live. Until next time.